So again, my name's Momo. I work at the Walter Warehouse. If you've never been down there before, we do events. We hold about anywhere between like 1,500 to 2,000 people. And we were originally a Burning Man camp, so Camp Walter. And what we wanted to do was bring some of the principles and the ideals that were at Burning Man out into what we call the default world. And that's where we live every day. We go to work, we go home, we go sleep. So we have a huge enforcement on consent. And someone in the chat said, like, the consent master. I I am not a consent master. I have put a lot of time and effort into how do we deal with the issue of consent, because there's obviously an issue, right? So that's why we're here. We're talking about consent in the same way that we're talking about harm reduction. So there's a need for harm reduction, which is why this whole training is going on right now. In the same way that we have a need to talk about consent, because there's definitely a problem. If it was just as easy as saying, live consent culture, no means no, then we wouldn't have problems of people getting drugged, people getting raped, and what I do in BED, which is the Bureau of Erotic Discourse. That's a camp that works directly with emergency services at Burning Man on Playa, where we're trying to gift the conversation on how to have the conversation about consent to do rape prevention, or even like smaller. So like, do you want a hug? So some of the things that we're talking about today is actually defining what consent is and what we do at the Walter Warehouse, which is our whole main goal is just to create a safe space, because that's what I want. And that's what I want for the people that come through with our guests. Daisy's an ambassador there, and she's in the front lines when it comes to creating the safe space. And this is very new. So we just came up with a policy where we're trying to not only, so there's retention of like retaining your customers and retaining your guests, but that's because like you want your guests to feel welcome to come back. So with this consent enforcement, we spent hours going through some of the problems that we saw. And then we got in a meeting and we're like, how are we going to handle this? And we came up with a 3-step process on how we actually enforce having people feel safe enough to say address to express themselves in our house. So there's some long-term goals that I don't really have any data on. These are literally just goals where we're looking for cooperation, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I do have Cody Hunt here with me too. He also works at the Walter Warehouse, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, I believe I introduced myself a little bit earlier. Right now I do production work at the warehouse, and when we first opened back up this last run, I was helping out with the ambassador team as well on the floor when we were kind of blindly developing this, what the process would be for taking care of that. So that's who I am. Yeah, so we're going to talk about what consent is as far as a legal definition goes. So this is a voluntary agreement to another's proposition. That's a simple way to say it. Voluntary agreement to another's proposition. To voluntarily agree to an act or proposal of another, which may range from contracts to sexual relations. The consent relates from anything from may I dance with you, can we pogo together, all the way to can we have intercourse, can I tie you up and do kinky stuff. Like it's the entire range of interaction between human beings, from friendly to sexual. Consent, legally standing, covers all of
that. Thanks, Cody. And when it comes to the Walter Warehouse, one of the things that we do at the door as often as we can is we have a simple personal definition, and we'll ask people, hey, do you know what consent is? Yes. Great. Go have a fun night. No. Well, what that means is before you hug somebody, touch someone, buy someone a drink, dance with them, you need to get an enthusiastic yes before engaging with that person. Does that make sense? Oh yeah, that makes total sense. All right, go on in. Have a great night. And with us foreshadowing that this is something that we do, it's for one, educating people that here's our boundary, and two, you know at the door. So this is something that we're really trying to strive for, where people know if you go to Walter Warehouse or to our house, just like how you go to, say, If you were invited over to my house, I would want you to know those parameters. I don't want to get groped. So this is something where we're vocalizing something so simple because it is a problem. So with creating a safe space, we're showing, do you care about the people that are coming into your facility? So again, with my house, if you come over and you start groping on me and you're not asking me for consent first, or if I start doing that to you, that's not showing you any sort of hospitality. But maybe that's the reason why you came over. That's okay. Maybe you had a Tinder date. That's fine. What we're going to do is ask for that enthusiastic yes, so that way we're getting the conversation going. When you start doing things like this, not only is it helping people to stay comfortable, but then go more into those closed door situations. You're now talking about those fantasies that maybe you weren't so confident to say before, where there's a lot of positivity that comes out of this when you're moving forward with things that you actually really want. So we're event promoters. We want to make sure that with our business, we're not promoting a sex club. What we're doing is just making sure that there is a safe space going on. And when, just like Daisy said, we know that drugs and alcohol are happening. A lot of people are going out, they're looking for hookup culture, which is completely fine as well. As that's happening and lines get blurred, we as leaders are there to make sure that we're there supporting when there is a consent complaint, and then moving forward just as support, or if we need to take it even further. So with having this, we're trying to retain those customers or our guests so they feel welcome to come back. It really is an emotional tie that we've found through our ambassador team like Daisy, when people support other people just by having the simple conversation that they feel like they're stood up for and their heart is now invested into us. Say if you're not a event promoter where this is like a regular business, there's no money exchange going on, you could also be doing things like what Daisy does with the Good Eggs in a volunteer way. So if you have your friends coming over and supporting something like, i.e. the Good Eggs, there's an investment of time, there's an investment of your thought, you're giving parts of yourself, and you're trying to find a solution for something. If you show that you care about these people, you're also going to retain the people that you have because there's trust there and there's respect. So over a business and over money, people are the things that we should be focusing on and that we should be investing our time and our emotions in hearing out whatever problems they may be having, because that is our largest and greatest asset. So we have a consent enforcement policy, and this is how we do it. So it is simplified down into a 3-step process, but by no means does that mean that it is something simple. Someone earlier was saying, like, why is it so hard when a harm reduction incident happens? Why do we get these flutters in our body? It's a confrontation, right? And we as leaders are stepping willingly into this confrontation. So the first step in this 3-step process, when you see something, or even if you think you see something, is called the hey, how's it going? So what the hey, how's it going is we as leaders, like, we're looking out on the floor, we're looking for things that are wrong. So what we want to try and do is approach people not assuming ill intent, because 99% of the time, nothing's actually going on that's wrong. You're just making yourself available, present, and you're not going to insert yourself into a situation in an aggressive manner, because most people will match whatever energy that you bring to the table. So when you go up and you go, hey, how's it going? We've had incidences at the warehouse where Cody's seen someone where it looks like, oh man, this guy's being sly in the corner. It looks like maybe it's trying to get into her equipment. And he goes over and he goes, hey, bud, how's it going? And dude turns around and his eyes are saucers and he smiles at him, gives him 2 thumbs up, and he's like, it's going great, dude. And it's like, okay, you're having a great night. That's fine. And more often than not, this is where it ends. The meat and potatoes of this is called the Teachable Moment. And so Cody Hunt and myself, as well as some of the other ambassadors, got in a meeting, and this is really where we have been seeing change And it is one of the more complex, but it's returned the most results in a positive manner. And I'll give it over to Cody because he really is able to articulate what this teachable moment is with its word lines and all. So, Cody?
Okay, so I'm going to try and shorten this down as much as possible. This is an extremely complex portion of this, but luckily in its complexities, it needs to remain a little bit loose and up for interpretation because it's the only way it works. A big part of enforcing consent is educating about consent because a lot of our problem with consent that we have in our culture isn't even necessarily based in malice. It's based in being mistaught and having bad practice. There's an alarmingly large amount of people in our culture and our city that just haven't had the opportunity to talk about consent in a way that isn't like discussing rape, right? Which is scary. That scares people. Now the conversation's really hard to have when consent can also be like, dude, like you kicked dirt on my shoe and I'm not down with that. Like, you know, that's a really low level thing. But again, we talked about the legal definition. This covers all of it. So consent shouldn't be scary to talk about, but it is for a lot of people. And so a big part of enforcing consent is teaching about consent. So the teachable moment is a way for people who are working for your company. We at the Walter Warehouse, we have our ambassadors, right? Our ambassadors are kind of our brand on the floor. They are people to keep the party going and activate the space, even when maybe not a lot of people have shown up yet, or like there's a lot of fucking people there and it's hard to keep control. And they're kind of there to help in all those situations. A big part of that has to do with watching out for over alcohol consumption, watching out for people having a bad trip kind of deal, right? To get them in the hands of somebody like the Good Eggs or in our case, escalate up if need be to our higher event staff who can step in and help for our procedures. And unfortunately, a large part of that is the consent violation stuff. And what I noticed on the floor pretty straight off is once you bring up consent, a majority of the people you bring it up to are surprised. Instantly, they are surprised and they are scared. They are so afraid they fucked up and that they're gonna like everything's gonna change because like and that is part of the problem. So if we allow ourselves to take control of that moment, calm things down. Let's say it's something that's not like it's not something that is so upsetting to you that you can't handle, right? Like I was touched a lot on the floor in the first couple of weeks. Touched a lot. Throughout, you know, a dozen different 5-hour long shows and me dressing up and inviting attention to myself, there were quite a few times that I experienced people reaching out and touching, and a lot of it was in non-sexual, non-aggressive, and non-offensive ways. And I was not upset at all. But I do know people exist out there, and I do know that like there are a couple people who are like on the scale of not wanting to interact with people that way on our team even. And so what I want to express to that person is I respond first with joy, big smile, and then I let them know like, hey, we're a consent forward company here, and what that means is before you give somebody a hug, buy someone a drink, or dance with somebody, you should ask first because it's just easier that way. Some people don't want to be hugged. Some people don't want you to touch on their costume the way you just did for me. And a lot of those people will instantly respond again with the fear. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. That whole thing, right? And so at that point you need to say like, or in my case, like, I'm not actually offended, right? You haven't, we're fine. We're cool. Hi, my name's Cody. How's it going? And then it's like, now you bring them into a calm space where they're not in a scared frame of mind. And you say, but this is important, right? Like, and do you have any questions about it? And you kind of we have opened the playing field. I can't believe how much just between Momo and I's experiences, offering that to somebody has led to them genuinely being like, yeah, actually, I do have a couple questions. And they never felt comfortable to ask, and they didn't know how to ask, but they felt safe enough to ask us because we had set this precedence that it's okay to talk about it. And we offer at the end of this confrontation, okay, now that you know this, immediately change the behavior. And I know in one case, Momo was, can I share the story? Yeah. She had someone kiss her on the cheek. He asked to give her a hug, and then when giving her a hug, kissed her on the cheek, and she's like, okay, well, now there's a boundary point. And they talked it out, and she was like, okay, you want to try again? I got another cheek. And he was like, can I kiss you on the cheek? She said yes. And boom, now they're implementing the change. His first step of implementation isn't an embarrassment, and he doesn't have to like push himself to do it. Momo is there to kind of guide him through it. And now this person is already actively changing their behavior. And they know, because at the end of the conversation, it's like, especially if it's something more on the worst side, which I'll get to. I know we're hitting the end of our time. I'm going to cover it real quick. We can say, you know, if it happens again, we will have to ask you to leave for tonight, or maybe indefinitely, depending. Now, sometimes the teachable moment is somebody said, that guy over there groped me multiple times tonight, and he kind of won't leave me alone. At which point we'll have one of our ambassadors take that person and go try and change their night by talking to them, listening to them, sharing the space with them. Well, those of us in the leadership roles can pin down this person, take them aside and say, hey, you've been pointed out by someone. This is what they said you did. Would you like to talk about it? Have you ever heard of consent? And if they're willing to listen, we talk and we give them the opportunity to learn, and we tell them if any other behavior happens, we will ask you to leave. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they fight back and they want to kind of get aggressive. And at that point, it's like, no, we're very kindly offering you this moment to learn about consent. And what I'm telling you at the end of the day is, if we see anything else, you will be asked to leave, potentially permanently, right? And our level of confrontation and simplification, how teachable the moment is, kind of depends on their response. But I do notice that 80% of the interactions around, you know, I'm pulling numbers out of nowhere, but it seems about like the majority of interactions lead to a positive teachable moment that seems to have already created a spiral of change. And the other, you know, 20% has been a hard teachable moment, all the way up to a teachable moment that the lesson was, you will be removed if you're not willing to change. And that's the lesson, unfortunately. And that's not the best lesson, but it's part of it. Because again, part of enforcing consent is teaching consent. So that's how we actually change the culture. So I kind of covered removal. I'll throw it over back to Momo. Sorry, I tried to do that as fast as I could.
No, you did great. And I felt like it was important for you to talk about the experiences that you've had, because you're frontline on the floor, because you have done that ambassador work. So when it goes into that third step of removal, again, just to kind of sum up what Cody had said, you don't get 2 teachable moments in one night. The first time you get the teachable moment, we're hoping that there's change and we're open to having the conversation. And then we do let them know, we don't say this twice. The second time, without emotion, we are just going to walk you to the door. And that is going to be a removal process. And then we have to decide, is that going to be permanent, or is that just for the night? And realistically, this is what I train our ambassador team. Any step of this process, the hey, how's it going, and the teachable moment, and then the need for removal, that's a judgment call. So there is no hard lines, and there's no going back and forth on like, so is it when someone touches somebody else's ass, or is it when someone hugs somebody? It's up to you. You as a leader to make that call and to feel what you're feeling in that moment and trust your instincts. When it comes to the removal process, when an ambassador says this person needs to get out, I don't ask questions. I just believe them. Same thing if someone goes up to the ambassadors. So with this specific removal process, we're hoping that it's just a walk to the door. We do try and get their ID. And what we do is we create an incident report anytime someone's removed. And more than 50% of the time, it's a removal because of something that's consent related. So if it's so severe that someone is not allowed to come back permanently, the getting of the ID is very, very important. So going up to someone and having that same kind of, hey, how's it going attitude, so they match your type of energy, you want to get that ID first. Not only do you get the ID when everything is calm, now you have that leverage. Taking the picture, getting their name, that way you can look them up, hopefully in some sort of system that you have in place like we have at the warehouse, will let us know, is this person blacklisted? So that way we have an 86 list of permanent removals. We haven't been open enough since the pandemic to have this yet. This is where like, no one's the consent queen around here, right? We're concerned individuals and we're trying this thing to make it happen. So with that removal process too, like it's gotten ugly sometimes. And that's where the need for security comes in. And this is why the good eggs are so important, because it removes the need for security. So that's our process. The one, hey, how's it going? The teachable moment that doesn't happen twice, and then the removal. So it is up to you. Like, the ball's in your court. When you implement this, I'm looking for feedback personally. So if anyone is trying this out and needs any coaching or guidance just from the experience that we've had, I'm all ears and I want to collaborate. So some of the longer term goals with this, and there's no data to my knowledge, is accountability. For one, if there is a consent complaint and say it's not inside of an event, there's people that get so frustrated, maybe they out something on Facebook or Instagram, they're calling people out, and now that person is in the spotlight, not only the victim, but the perpetrator. And what normally happens is people are going to side with who they trust the most. So there's really no knowing what happens, say, on a one-on-one situation. So with this 3-step process, people want to go out and people want to hang out with their friends. If you want to come to, say, the Walter Warehouse, this victim, say, doesn't have to now out anybody. It's, why can't you go in there? And that person has to basically tell on themselves. If we're known for a place for being a consent for a culture, it's not put on the victim anymore. There's support of us at the Walter Warehouse. And like, we're not even doing it 100% directly. And if we have other people that also do this as well, where it's like club to club or organization to organization, then it's really going to start raising some concerns. And we're hoping that now the person that's getting accused really takes a look at themselves, and then they have to figure out how they can maybe redeem themselves in some way. We don't have a program for that, but that's something that we're hoping for in the future, where there is, i.e., almost like some sort of support with, like, are you having problems with practicing consent out there? Here's some things that you can do. And it's not just because you're being observed, but you're actually changing. And then we're really making the teachable moment, those blurred lines, even broader. So to wrap this up, I know that we went over time. We are looking for other people who are practicing this. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me directly, momo.keller, Kellar, at walterproductions.com, or Cody C. Hunt. The importance of these incident reports is allowing you to have the data so you can look back and actually see for yourself in writing with names, with potentially other organizations, where you can share this information across these club organizations. Not only that, we don't have this perfected. This is maybe 6 months old, if that. So if other people are practicing it, we have seen very positive results. We've seen thank yous from people that we've had the teachable moment from. And then we've had people cry in our arms just for supporting them in what looks like the smallest way, because when it comes to consent issues, it's a really touchy topic and it's so prevalent out there. If we're doing it this early on with, hey, can I give you a hug? Can I buy you a drink? Can I dance with you? Then hopefully we're preventing larger issues in the future where we can practice that behind closed doors. So thank you, Daisy, for putting this on. That's all I got. Zoom.